They say you can't pick your neighbors, but no one warned me mine would be the four-wheeled devil in yoga pants driving an HOA-branded SUV straight through my soul and my private ranch road. I knew I'd reached my breaking point when I found her tire tracks carved into the fresh dirt I'd graded just hours before, my private property sign snapped in half like a breadstick at an Italian wedding. That was the moment I decided. I was done being nice. I was done with warnings. It was time to dig a hole so deep she'd fall in and maybe get a moment of reflection on the way down. It all started innocently enough. My ranch is tucked at the edge of a sleepy little town in Texas where cows outnumber people and everyone mostly minds their own business. I've owned the land for 15 years, and the road that runs alongside it, technically mine, was nothing but a dirt trail I'd kept in shape with my own two hands and a beat-up grader I bought at auction for $300. It wasn't glamorous, but it worked. That road was the artery of my land, leading from the main gate to the barn, chicken coop, and the modest little house I call home. No one ever used it but me, my cows, and the occasional Amazon delivery guy brave enough to risk the mud. Then came Karen. Karen arrived like a biblical plague, complete with loud opinions, unsolicited advice, and an SUV that she drove like a battering ram through everything decent in the world. She moved into the brand-new HOA subdivision that popped up on the other side of the creek last year, a real eyesore of identical beige boxes and front lawns sprayed so green they looked radioactive. They called it Whispering Pines. There ain't a pine in sight. She found my road the way a mosquito finds bare skin. At first, it was once or twice, harmless I thought, probably just someone lost. But then it became a daily event. Morning, noon, evening, always with that smug wave as she drove past me like I was some background character in her personal rom-com. I stood there holding a feed bucket, watching her SUV kick up dust over the spots I'd just leveled, the same way you might watch a raccoon tear through your garbage, disgusted but fascinated by the audacity. I put up a sign. Simple. Black letters, white background. Private road, no trespassing. She tore it down the next day. I found it folded in half and tucked behind one of my hay bales like she thought I'd never notice. I did. I always notice. The next time I saw her, I waved her down. I tried to be polite, civil even. Told her this was private property and that the road wasn't some shortcut to the highway. She smiled with all the grace of a piranha and said, "Oh honey, we're all neighbors now. What's a little dirt between friends? A little dirt? Lady, that dirt is my morning meditation. That dirt is the result of years of hard work, blood, and more busted shovels than I care to count. But I let it go. I figured maybe she'd get the message, maybe she'd back off. She didn't. What she did next made me understand what true rage feels like. I was coming back from the feed store one day and saw a group of HOA members standing in a semicircle near the start of the road on my property. Karen was holding a clipboard like she was hosting a game show. I slowed my truck, rolled down the window, and asked what was going on. She said they were holding an emergency vote to make the road shared access for community convenience. I laughed. Out loud. Then I realized she wasn't joking. That night I found a letter in my mailbox. Not from the county. Not from a lawyer. From Karen. On HOA letterhead. It was printed in Comic Sans. She explained, very cheerfully, that the board has voted to integrate your road into Whispering Pines travel access, and that any resistance would be interpreted as non-compliance with community guidelines. She even signed it with a little smiley face. That was the moment the switch flipped. No more talking. No more signs. I wasn't going to argue with someone who thought Comic Sans was a legal font. I sat on my porch that night with my dog Boomer curled up at my feet, staring at that road. It stretched out like a red carpet of disrespect. The moon was bright, the air smelled like hay and cow sweat, and all I could think about was how satisfying it would be to give that road a little upgrade. Something memorable. Something that would make her think twice. I sipped my beer, and by the time I drained the bottle, the plan was already digging itself into my brain. Next morning, I called my buddy Clint. Clint's a big man with a beard like a grizzly bear, and the kind of mind that understands vengeance as a form of art. Used to work in construction, until he punched his foreman for calling his backhoe a toy. My kind of guy. I told him what was going on. He listened, real quiet, then nodded and said, "You want a ditch she'll remember for the rest of her life?" I said, "I want the Grand Canyon, Clint." And just like that, the trench was born. We started at dawn. 2 old men, a backhoe, and a righteous grudge. We dug deep, deeper than necessary, deeper than reasonable. The kind of trench you could hide a dinosaur skeleton in. We made sure to position it just around the bend in the road, out of sight until it was too late. We camouflaged it with plywood, then a layer of dirt, then some brush on top for good measure. It looked natural. It looked perfect. And when it was done, we sat back with sweet tea and lawn chairs and waited for the storm to come. Karen wouldn't know what hit her. Clint and I stood there admiring our creation like a couple of artists staring at a freshly finished masterpiece. The trench was a thing of beauty, about 3 feet wide and nearly 4 feet deep, just enough to catch an overconfident SUV without causing real harm. We weren't out to kill anyone, just humble them. Or humiliate them, preferably both. The plywood cover was sturdy enough to support light foot traffic, but not a 2-ton suburban assault vehicle driven by the queen of entitlement. We sprinkled loose dirt on top and threw down a few leaves and twigs to sell the illusion. It looked like any other patch of dirt road. Ordinary. Innocent. Deadly. We didn't have to wait long. By noon the next day, Karen was back at it, barreling down the path like she was racing for a lifetime supply of HOA-approved grass seed. She had the windows down and her music blaring. Some kind of motivational podcast about channeling your inner boss energy. The irony was so thick I could have bottled it and sold it at the farmer's market. Clint nudged me from where we sat behind a row of hay bales. I leaned forward in my chair, heart pounding like I was about to watch the final scene of a revenge movie. Then it happened. The moment her front tires hit the trench, the plywood cracked like thunder. Her SUV dipped forward violently, slamming into the front edge of the hole before the back tires even realized what was going on. The whole vehicle jerked down and forward, the airbag deploying with a loud pop that echoed through the field. A puff of white exploded inside the cabin, and for one glorious moment, I saw Karen's shocked, puffed-up face framed by powder and panic. Clint wheezed beside me, trying to contain his laughter. I clapped a hand over my mouth and nearly fell out of my chair. It was like a ballet of karmic justice unfolding in slow motion. The SUV teetered with its front end lodged in the trench, back tires spinning uselessly in the air. Karen's door flew open, and she stumbled out, clutching her phone and shouting something about sabotage, booby traps, and pressing charges. She limped in a dramatic fashion that suggested nothing was wrong but her pride. She didn't see us. We stayed low, backs pressed against the barn wall, shaking with suppressed laughter. Clint reached into his cooler and handed me a soda like we were watching a backyard wrestling match. It wasn't just petty revenge. It was a show. And we had front row seats. Karen stood there flailing her arms, trying to flag down someone, anyone, to witness her tragedy. She took about 20 pictures, each one more dramatic than the last, before stomping back into the SUV to try and reverse out. But it was stuck. Proper stuck. The trench had claimed its prize, and it wasn't letting go. I gave it about 15 minutes before the sheriff showed up. Not because I called him. Because Karen did. She had him on speed dial, apparently. Sheriff Cole pulled up in his cruiser, lights off, looking more annoyed than concerned. He stepped out, took one look at the scene, then turned to Karen with the weary expression of a man who had seen this circus before and didn't want a ticket. She started in on him immediately, spinning a tale of malicious intent, sabotage, and how I'd endangered the community. Sheriff Cole nodded patiently, then turned to me as I walked over, hands in the air like I was approaching a wild animal. I explained calmly, in full detail, How this was my land, my road, and how the trench was part of a soil erosion project I'd been planning for weeks. Totally legal. Entirely reasonable. I even had a laminated county map with property lines outlined in bright red, just in case. Sheriff Cole squinted at the trench, scratched his chin, and said, "Looks like erosion prevention to me." Karen nearly exploded. Her face turned the color of a ripe tomato, and she started waving her phone around like a sword. She demanded an investigation. She demanded he arrest me. She even suggested I had set a vehicular trap, which made Clint snort so hard he choked on his root beer. Cole wasn't buying it. He pointed out that she had no business being on the road to begin with, that it was, in fact, trespassing, that she had, on several occasions, been told not to use the road, and that continuing to do so was, legally speaking, a bad idea. Karen stormed off to the passenger seat of her SUV, arms crossed, pouting like a toddler who'd been told she couldn't have dessert. Cole gave me a look, one that said, "You didn't hear this from me," and murmured, "Maybe dig a few more of those erosion trenches." I nodded solemnly. "Nature's unpredictable, Sheriff." As the tow truck arrived, called by Karen, of course, the comedy of errors reached new heights. The driver took one look at the trench, shook his head, and radioed for backup. While waiting, he tried to reposition his truck and ended up with one wheel caught on the edge of the trench. Not stuck, but close enough to make him rethink his life choices. Clint stood nearby, sipping his soda like a man watching a fireworks show. We didn't even need popcorn. The universe was doing all the work. Karen, meanwhile, started pacing again. This time she was on the phone, shouting into the receiver about escalation, legal recourse, and something about punitive damages. I figured she was either calling a lawyer or her therapist. Maybe both. That night, I found a folded letter stuffed in my mailbox again. No stamp. Just Karen's handwriting and a fresh wave of passive-aggressive fury. She accused me of conducting a targeted rural assault, and said the HOA would be pursuing all available legal remedies. She ended the note with,